Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I'm Patrick Murphy with Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports. We're going to be talking to you for roughly another happy hour here. We're going to talk some Michigan State with our guy Stephen Brooks from Spartan Insider here in the next few minutes. We'll talk about the season the Spartans have had, which has not gone the way that they expected or hoped, I think, up in East Lansing and kind of what to expect coming into Ohio Stadium for a primetime game on Saturday night. After that, I have some thoughts on Ohio State's offense I want to share with you guys. If you have questions, please throw them in the chat. We'll have some time at the end to answer some of those. But let's dive into it and get to our Michigan State discussion. Steven, what's going on, my man?
Hey, man, just getting my last couple of things in order. I guess first I got to cover some basketball tonight, but then just getting everything else in order to head down to Columbus this weekend. So nothing too exciting beyond that stuff. Just working and work adjacent things.
Yep. No craziness in basketball, right? No, that it was just a very easy game to start the Spartan season the other night.
Right. Yeah. Right. About that. Yeah. Not everyone had sort of. I think a lot of the fan base had they'd gone through their stages and they'd moved to the stage of forget this. At least there's basketball, and then that very quickly that floor dropped out underneath them. James Madison's a better team than folks probably realize on paper. I get they're not a brand. It's not like a mid-major you recognize, but they're legit. And not that Michigan State should have lost to them at home, but tough start to the season for those guys. I think they'll bounce back tonight with Southern Indiana, but and I still think there's a lot of good things in store potentially for this team, but that was obviously not the way you want to come out of the gate.
No. And we're going to talk mostly football here, but Buckeyes didn't have their greatest performance either. And look, James Madison is, I saw this on Twitter, the only team in the country to be undefeated in football and have a top 5 basketball win. So, credit to them, right?
Sure.
Let's get into it. And I want to let you know, I'm going to ask you here when we're towards the end, kind of the Michigan State thoughts on what's going on in Ann Arbor. So have that matriculating in the back of your head there, because I'd like to get your perspective on that, but don't want to blindside you with it.
Sure.
But let's talk Spartans right now. What would you say was your expectation for this team coming into the season? And then we'll get into kind of how things have played out. But what were you thinking this team could be had things worked out maybe differently this year prior to the season starting?
Yeah, my expectations weren't very high. I picked them to go 6-6. I think most people were between 5 to 7 wins. Some people, the very optimistic folks, had maybe 8 or 9 on the high end. So it was never going to be like a Big Ten contending team. I thought there were a lot of question marks. They lost some NFL talent in some key spots. Not a ton, but, good players. A guy like Jaden Reed was an all Big Ten guy, for example. I didn't have a lot of faith with what was coming back. The quarterback play obviously was a total mystery and has not panned out in a great way. So I thought they'd be a 500 team. I thought this would just be sort of a tread water type of year. Don't go backwards, but don't do anything, probably not going to overachieve like they did in 2021, but don't go backwards and don't lose the momentum. This was all about back then, this was all about continuing the momentum that Mel Tucker was creating on the recruiting trail. Their best players right now, the most of their talent is concentrated in the freshman and sophomore classes. So Mel Tucker's final 2 recruiting classes. And it was all about, just grow those guys, get them into being sophomores and juniors instead of freshmen and sophomores, get another decent class underneath you. Just don't fall on your face and lose your recruiting momentum. Get a third class like that in here. And then, 2024 and beyond is when real expectations, I think, would have come back onto the program. So that's really all it was. Just get back to a bowl game. There's no excuse for Michigan State not to be in a bowl game at a minimum. So just do that and just kind of do the bare minimum. But like I said, to keep the overarching trajectory in place, which would have been, which was all about recruiting. If they could have got a third straight top 25 class, then I think, again, they next year, I think was when you'd start to see them turn that corner and get back closer to a Big Ten contending-ish type of program.
Well, things have not gone that way, as I think. let's go back to the Mel Tucker situation. We don't need to go details on what happened, what didn't happen, all that's going on, but how big of a blow was this to the program? You mentioned the recruiting and things starting to move in the right direction. Obviously, they gave Mel Tucker the big contract after the impressive year they had a few years ago. To lose a coach who was starting to really build something there kind of after the last few years, how tough is that on this program?
Yeah, it's interesting because I say that, and like again, that's a real thing. The most talent is in these youngest two classes on the roster. So he was clearly upgrading the talent in that respect. But after going 5-7 last year, like Michigan State with the resources, with the players they should be in a bowl game. That should be your floor. So having missed that last year, and there were some games, Indiana beat them at home, completing 2 passes. Like there were some games, Minnesota came in and beat the brakes off of them, which Minnesota was just okay. Like there were some losses that people were like, what is this? Like this is not where you should be in year 3, coming off 11. Like it just was not what people thought it was. So a lot of, a good amount of people, I think, had sort of either some had flat out turned on Mel Tucker for sure. But I think a lot of people were starting to become suspicious about whether this was all going to take shape. This 2024 class, so far, even over the summer, was not shaping up to be a third straight top 25. They weren't getting the same caliber of kids on campus just for visits, and they didn't get a lot of those top 100 kids or 5 stars or anything that they had 2 years ago. But it created sort of a buzz, I think, that really helped them on the trail. And again, they ended up finishing top 25 those 2 years. This year wasn't really trending that way. I think they had 3 commits, if I remember right, coming into summer official visit season. So people were like, what is this? Has the buzz already evaporated? Is the bloom off the rose? So in that respect, some people were like, man, maybe you dodged a bullet. Maybe it wasn't going to turn around the way you thought it was. I mean, some people were never really on board with the extension. But then there were others that were like, we don't want to have to hit reset either. And potentially now, lose a good chunk or more, of those last 2 classes that make up a lot of the high-end talent on this team. So I just more than anything, I think people were just upset and they didn't. Nobody wants that like embarrassment, that factor, like the headlines, the nature of it, all the salacious details and everything. Like at Michigan State, especially given the last handful of years around here, like to be brought back into the mud like that, just in the news cycle, really made people mad. Like at that point, it was easy, I think, to cut ties. There were, like I said, there were some people still hanging on that believe that the corner was about to be turned. I think there's another segment, though, that had sort of grown suspicious, and then there was probably a small segment that had already, thrown in the towel on him anyway.
I know Harlan Barnett is currently leading this team as the interim head coach, but has there been much talk about where Michigan State goes next as the season has gone on, or is that kind of a wait and see, we'll deal with that in the offseason type of approach?
In terms of the coaching search, or like will Harlan Barnett have a chance? Or
okay. just the coaching search in general.
Yeah, that's, I mean, the one benefit of getting, of the situation playing out at the time that it did, of course, is that you basically had 2.5 months, really, 2 technically once he was fired, but really 2.5 to get all your ducks in a row and to do a lot of research and double back, triple back, double, triple check everything, So all that to say, I think October was a lot of that vetting, backgrounding, observation, just watching things play out. With all this time, you don't have to get caught up in somebody who was hot down the stretch or somebody who was hot in September or somebody who just pulled off a big November upset or won a bowl game, that they shouldn't have. You don't have to get caught up in anything like that. You have a bigger sample size to judge things from. Now, as we move into October, I think it gets a lot more real. It's my understanding that there is a short list of candidates. I don't have those names for you, unfortunately. But I think that process in terms of, getting more informal feel and back channeling with some of those people has begun and will continue to happen throughout this month. The things that I know confidently at this point is that they do want head coaching experience. That's something that's been a consistent trait with AD Alan Haller, who's been on the job about 2 years now. Obviously, this will be his biggest hire. He had a big hand in hiring Mel Tucker. when he was a deputy AD. So, but as the full-time guy, this will obviously be the biggest thing he's done. But he's hired a women's basketball coach, a hockey coach, I think a rowing coach, a soccer coach, maybe not soccer, but volleyball, softball. And he's pretty much always hired somebody who's been a head coach at a lower level and given them the chance to elevate it here. So I think head coaching experience, one, and a clean reputation too. When Mel Tucker leaves the way he did, I think they're going to put a premium on character and having a pretty spotless background check. Those would be the two things I feel confident right now saying. I know there's more criteria out there. And there's things, that I think that they should do, but those two things I think are good enough to put in cement.
What do you think they should do? Just since you brought it up.
Yeah, well, I think like younger, if you can skew younger, under 60 would be ideal. I just think that fits better in the modern game now,
Sure.
whether you're recruiting or trying to retain players or trying to energize the fan base and get NIL money in your coffers or whatever. And I also just personally, you get the best coach, but personally, I think if it's an offensive background guy, is a plus. Not that you disclude defensive coaches, or if a defensive guy is your best guy, then that's what you do. I mean, Mark D'Antonio, you guys all know him. We all know, like, defensive background, greatest coach in modern program history, probably the whole program history. You don't turn down a great coach just because he's got a defensive background. But I think offense has been a struggle around here for quite a while. I just don't think the fan base is going to – I think they'd be more receptive to, quite honestly, losing 49-42 as opposed to 24-20 games. They've just seen enough of that. I think if somebody could come in with a quick fix on offense where you're putting up a bunch of points already and it's not a slow build there, it's a slow build on defense, and sort of reverse the roles a little bit, I think more people would – I think that'd be more palatable at this point.
Yeah, modern day college football offense rules the day, right? The Buckeyes are learning that this year, actually. Let's get into on the field stuff for Michigan State this year. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball. And we touched on some of this in our written stories, which our question exchange, which we'll have up later on the site. But just what's been good about this offense? Where does it still need to improve? Just kind of how is it matched up with your expectations coming into the year?
There hasn't been a lot that's been good on it, to be honest. I had major question marks, and a lot of them have panned out. I'm pretty sure every year we've talked, Patrick, I've mentioned the offensive line. Just as a program, it has not been up to par in a long time, and it takes a long time to get that unit right, unless you're just able to hit on major portal wins, I guess. But otherwise, to naturally develop one, it takes a long time. And again, if they can keep all their kids in there, I do think a year or two from now it could be a pretty good unit. But again, best players are in those younger classes, and at that position, you're just not often ready to play early. So that unit's just been about what I expected, sort of a below average, lower tier Big Ten O-line. And as everybody, watching and listening here knows, like, that just handcuffs you in so many ways. So their running game has never really taken off. And they got a really good running back, Nathan Carter, transfer from Connecticut. He's a good ball player. I mean, he's probably one of the more underrated players in the Big Ten. Compact but strong, fast, shifty. Just he can do a lot with a little. Not necessarily in the way Kenneth Walker used to do it, but he's a good back. And I don't think people see that enough because his numbers aren't really there. But when other folks' teams play Michigan State, I think they come away saying, man, that kid's pretty good. If he had a decent line in front of him, he'd be 1,000-yard rusher. He'd be probably fringe all Big Ten, third team type of thing. Like he's that talented, but he just hasn't been able to get going. And they've been in deficits where they haven't been able to run the ball as much on schedule as they would like. So receiver, my issue coming into the season with them was you lose Jaden Reed and Keon Coleman, who's down at Florida State just dominating. Probably gonna have an All-American year for him. Where was the high-end talent? They had a bunch of guys who were okay, kind of complimentary number 3 types. But that's all they had. And that's really borne out to be the truth. They just don't have a top-end guy that scares you in any type of way. Now they're a little dinged up as we go into this game. Trey Mosley is a starter who's questionable for this one, got hurt against Minnesota. Jerron Glover's another starter, second-year player, questionable for this one. So, that a group that just talent-wise has a pretty low ceiling is now limited physically. Tight end Malik Carr is probably their best NFL prospect on offense. 6'6", 260. Basketball player coming out of two-sport guy coming out of high school. Had like a dozen basketball offers, but was always going to play football. Spent a year on Izzo's team after 2021 just as a deep bench guy, but sort of that was a recruiting promise when they got him out of the portal from Purdue. So just a high-level athlete, but very, very inconsistent, lacking as a blocker. But he's a guy that he's expected to return this week. He's missed the last couple games.
Yeah.
He's a guy that when they feature him, can make some big plays. I mean, 6'6", 260, you just – sometimes physics come into play and you just can't guard a guy like that, So he's a guy who can give everybody problems, but they don't get the ball to him a lot. And he doesn't always do the things that you need to do to get on the field and earn, targets and trust and reps. So he's not a consistent factor for them, but can pop up and make a big play here and there. And then, as I said, quarterback play has been a total mystery, and we can get into that. And it just hasn't really been good, whoever's been in there. But coming into the year, I just had no clue what to expect. And therefore, I really wasn't comfortable predicting anything too out there in terms of team success or offensive production, just because it was guys who'd never been in those shoes before. So that's kind of where the offense is right now. It's not a threatening group. They don't move the ball consistently right now. They haven't turned it over as much lately, but it's not an explosive group, and they continue to have questions at quarterback.
You mentioned Keon Coleman. I wanted to ask you about him because obviously he's having this year at Florida State, had the big game to start the year that everyone saw against LSU. What was he viewed like when he announced for the transfer portal? Because it's a guy that I knew just from covering the Big Ten and whatnot, but I don't feel like it was as big of a name. And now all of a sudden, like you said, he's an All-American level player. What was this viewed as a really big loss? And are people surprised that he's produced the way he has at Florida State?
Yeah, it should have been. I mean, it should have been like a national headline type of thing. I mean, I told Bud Elliott, who works for us, about him, and just because I was able to see him up close. I knew him from recruit. Like the kid has always kind of been underrated. He's a freak talent. He was going to be a first rounder, whether he was here, there, anywhere. The kid is 6'4", like 215, insane, freakish athleticism. I mean, he was a triple sport athlete, maybe quadruple sport athlete in high school.
Wow.
You look up his basketball highlight tape, he's doing 360s in game. He's doing between the legs, windmills, and so just ridiculous dunks in games. And then he translates all that seamlessly to the football field. I heard coming into 2022 that he was just dominating camp and was their best player by far. And that's a team that had Jaden Reed on it.
Yeah.
Who was a second-round pick of the Packers and was doing pretty well as a rookie. Just dominating, unguardable, and we saw a couple games like that where he really made that mark. So absolutely, everyone here knew what he was. Coming out of high school, it was a major recruiting win for Mel Tucker in his first class, and really more programs should have been on him coming out of high school. So absolutely, I thought from day one he's a future NFL kid, and as he progressed and actually learned how to play receiver and some technique things. By the time coming into this year, I was like, yeah, he's going to be a first-round pick, and he's got all the tools. He's a very, very good player. And so, yeah, everyone knew it was a notable loss. And that's what I kept saying is when you're talking about this offense and it doesn't really have anybody that scares you, he was that guy that coming into a game like this weekend, at least you have that guy. I don't care if it's Ohio State or Youngstown State, but every game you go into offensively, you have at least one thing you can hang your hat on. And It was Keon Coleman. They lost that, the second he went out the door. We saw even against Michigan last year, he sort of kept them in it in the first half. Against Washington, there were some moments like that. He was that guy that could make a play against any team you faced. Mm-hmm. And now they don't have that clearly as an offense, and they've struggled because of it.
Well, you touched on briefly the quarterbacks. There's been 3, I believe, that have played for Michigan State. Can you take us through just kind of the cycle at quarterback that has been the 2023 season?
Yeah, so it started with Peyton Thorne, the 2-year starter, transferred out at the end of the spring. He's at Auburn. I'm sure folks realize that. And that left it basically between Noah Kim and Caden Hauser in camp. Noah Kim's a 4th-year guy. He was Thorne's backup last year. He won the job coming out of camp. And basically – he won the job much like Peyton Thorne did, coming into 2021, just by being the more steady, trustworthy and risk-averse guy. That's what we've learned with this staff. It's like they really value taking care of the ball and don't make the big mistake. I value avoiding the big mistake more than I value making the big splashy play, if that makes sense. And so Noah Kim, has been in the system for 4 years, knew the checks at the line of scrimmage, had chemistry with some of those receivers who were emerging up from the second string and whatnot. So he wins the job, and he does okay the first 2 weeks. Was Big Ten Player of the Week offensively, I think, in week 2 against Richmond. Week 1 was against Central Michigan. But as soon as they started playing Power 5 teams with Washington in week 3, his production fell off a cliff, and he was no longer the safe, cautious guy. He was turning the ball over. He was making risky plays. I think he had 6 turnovers and 1 pick across his last 3 starts. 6 picks and 1 touchdown over his last 3 starts. I'm pretty sure something very close to that. So he never was really the big play guy, and then he stopped being the cautious ball security guy at the same time. So really, the ways that he won the job initially no longer became valid, and the offense just completely flatlined. So they just had to have a spark. We all know, we've all seen enough college football. Like, sometimes a change is just all you need. Whether the next guy is objectively better, sometimes a change, it just does it.
Yeah.
So in comes Caden Hauser. He started against Rutgers for the first time. He had done some mop-up duty a little bit before that. He's a redshirt freshman. First big-time quarterback recruit this staff landed was from St. John Bosco, 4-star kid, Elite 11 finalist out there. And a lot of people, behind the scenes, mostly in the fan base, but a lot of people were very, very excited for him to finally get his shot. And it's just been okay. He's started every game since that Rutgers night or afternoon, I guess. In fairness to him, Rutgers was played in a total downpour the entire day.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he's a Nevada kid who finished in California, finished high school out there. He said he'd never played in rain before. I get it, but whatever. Second career start is against Michigan, and get your jokes out. Pause for laughter, okay? But they're still a really good defense. No matter what you want to, say about them right now, they're still very, very good. So then finally Minnesota, his third start felt like, okay, this is an even playing field upon which we can judge him sort of naturally and fairly. And he didn't lead a touchdown drive. The offense, outside of 2 early fumbles that they recovered right on the fringe of the red zone, kicked 2 field goals, but they didn't get touchdowns out of them. The offense just didn't move. And so Sam Levitt, the true freshman, came in that game. He led their only touchdown drive and just gave him an immediate spark. He's a sort of a gunslinger, like swashbuckler off script. He'll make things happen with his legs. He'll throw on the run. Like, I've kind of compared him to like a poor man's, like, don't get it twisted, but some poor man's shades of Baker Mayfield in there, just in terms of how he plays. I'm not necessarily comparing him to a Heisman Trophy winner, but in terms of style and his ability to extend plays, make things happen off script with his feet, all that, he looked really impressive. And so much that I thought last week, and so did most people, kind of thought Levitt might start last week's game against Nebraska, because that was going to be his 4th game. And now they're going to have to make a redshirt decision on him. It didn't happen. He only played 2 series against Nebraska. They had a pre-scripted plan. They said every 3rd series of the half, we're going to throw you in there. The first one, they ended up just incidentally backed up to their own 4-yard line, so not a great situation for him there. Yeah. And then he only got one other drive the rest of the day. And now he's at 4 games. They blew 1 game against Maryland where he played 1 series, and they blew 1 against Michigan where I think he played 2, maybe 3, very late in the game. And now he was a 4-star kid himself, like Gatorade Player of the Year in Oregon, formerly committed to Washington State. Like, he's a guy that, what's he really playing for this staff? Is he playing to market himself for the portal? Is he playing to get to earn a spot for the next staff, and get some stuff on film? So I don't know if he's going to be available this weekend, long story short, because he is right at that threshold to where if he plays 1 more snap, this year counts for him. Now, he comes from an athletic family. His dad was a college player. His brother's in the NFL. And the one thing you consistently hear about him is that he's super, super confident. Like, legitimately came into camp in August thinking he could win the job as a true freshman without being here for spring. So a guy like that maybe doesn't think he needs 4 years, to make it to the league. Maybe he's not concerned with the red shirt. I don't know. He was asked about it last weekend. He said he'd have to sit down and talk about it and think about it. I don't know which way he's going to go because I think it's clear he's the most talented. I think it's clear he gives them the most upside. But Kaden Hauser, the incumbent starter, he's played just above that line, I think, where it would become clear. As soon as he dropped below that line, like the Mendoza line, I think you'd call. I'm not a baseball guy, but as soon as he dropped below that line, it'd be easy to say, okay, yank him and give Levitt a shot. But I think he's played just okay enough to where it feels a little unfair to replace him right away. So it's delicate, it's tricky. I really don't know what you do if you're the coaching staff, but that's the situation there. And I don't know if Levitt's going to be available, and I don't even know if it makes sense for him, to be honest, to play it out for a lame duck staff like this. I really wouldn't blame him either way, but that's kind of the situation there. I know I went long on that.
No, that's good. Obviously, a key position for this game and the rest of the season, and quite a unique situation, I think, there with how that's all played out. Let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball because I don't want to hold you too long. This, as I asked you in our written piece, like this was the no-fly zone. This was what Michigan State was the defense. It has not been the same the last few years. Kind of where are we defensively with the Spartans right now?
Yeah, they're finally kind of turning a corner. I know the numbers and the stats probably don't reflect that very strongly, but at least compared to where they've been under Mel Tucker, his staff, remaining, they are improving this year and showing some life. And they did in the second half of last year too. Finally, after Scotty Hazelton, the DC, has been here the entire time, and people have been ready to get rid of him basically since year 2, even when they won 11 games. In 2021, they were dead last nationally in passing yards allowed per game. Last year, they were dead last in interceptions nationally with 2, and only 1 was from a DB. So things haven't been great on that side of the ball. And some people have blamed scheme, some people have blamed talent. I think it's probably been both. But this year, they've kind of have turned a corner in some ways. The D-line in the front 7 as a whole was supposed to be really good. And I was saying, during the preseason, like I told you earlier, I thought they'd win 6 games.
Yeah.
But if they were going to overachieve and become something greater than that, I thought it would be because this front 7 was like maybe one of the 2 or 3 best in the Big Ten. Hasn't happened. They made a big deal about their transfer D-line class that came in. They got 3 tackles who were all 6'5", 300 plus, and only one of them, Jalen Sami from Colorado, has played even, rotation snaps. The other 2 guys have combined, I think, for like 4 games and basically been non-factors. They brought in a transfer end, Tumise Adelea, formerly of A&M. Only played 3 games in 2 years at A&M, was like a 4-star kid coming out of high school after that. They thought they were getting a big-time player. He was a big end at like 290 pounds. They were touting how he could play 0 technique all the way out to 9. And he's already gone from the program. He left before the Minnesota game and was going into the transfer portal. I think he ended up doing that. Either way, no longer with the team and really wasn't productive at all for them. So the D-line portal additions that they touted all offseason have been a total bust. The returning guys have been their best guys. Simeon Barrow, number 8. He had a brief 2-day flirtation with the transfer portal. He's back, though. He's their best D-tackle. Zion Young, number 9, in defensive ends, probably is their best end, sophomore. He's a guy that I think I would be surprised if there's not some heavy portal interest in him after the season. A kid from Georgia, really good player, but still a little raw. So as a defense, the front 7, they're still pretty good at stopping the run, but they can't rush the passer consistently basically at all. And that's been a problem for several years, with this defense. The linebackers, again, they're more downhill. They're not as deep as they were. Jacoby Windman, one of their better playmakers. He's a guy who can get up on the line and rush the passer and do creative things like that. He's out for the season. And so they're left with a bunch of guys who can flow downhill and stop the run on you, but they're very, very susceptible to the passing game. And, that's been something that bugged people for a long time. Tight ends getting open, deep, intermediate crossers getting open, throwing over their heads 15, 20 yards downfield. They're not very reliable in the passing game at all. And then the defensive backfield was the weakness for the longest time. Cornerbacks just getting cooked and safeties that couldn't tackle and everything. This year it's finally coming together. And the shame of it is you just don't know how long it'll be together and what they're growing toward,
Right.
with the inevitability of probably some turnover in the portal after this season when the new staff gets here. But 4 out of the 5 starters are first or second year players. Remember, I said that's where the talent, is concentrated on this roster. 3 out of those 4, I think at least, were 4-star kids, maybe even 4. So they're all very highly regarded recruits. They're all very, Mel Tucker was a stickler on size, so they all have legit size and length and measurables. They're just very good athletes back there, and they're all really coming together and showing some progress and some growth. They do occasionally, like they got true freshman corner starting right now, Chance Rucker, true freshman. Like he looks a little skinny out there sometimes. And sometimes he needs a little more beef, on him to take down a ball carrier. Okay, safety Jaden Mangum, sophomore. Sometimes you can just tell he needs a little more seasoning, but then he'll pop up and make a huge play coming over across the field and getting a pick. He's got 4 interceptions on the year. Dylan Tatum is a corner who was a sprinter, hurdler, running back, do-it-all guy in high school, and is really learning to play corner this last year. He played some safety and nickel and all sorts of stuff as a true freshman, really just getting roots at corner. And he has some very good moments. Then he has some moments where you're like, this kid's played corner for less than 12 months, So – but they're really, if you could put like a franchise tag on a unit in college, and say we just want to keep all these guys, it would no doubt be back there because they're all 4 out of the 5 are young, and there's just a lot of upside there. Now Marvin Harrison will probably have like 250 yards on him, and people will think I'm crazy, but trust me, when you've seen it as bad as it was these last couple of years, there's some very noticeable optimism and some promise there. I think that, as I told you in our Q&A, I think they'll make a couple good plays that people will be like, whoa, but not enough to shut down Ohio State's passing game.
All right. Let's get you out of here on this Michigan stuff, because that's all anyone really seems to want to talk about, at least in our neck of the woods. I'm curious how it's been viewed in East Lansing and among Michigan State fans. I mean, if you go to our message board right now, I would say probably 70% of it is Harbaugh, Michigan, Big Ten commissioners, all that related. What's kind of been the reaction as sort of Michigan's other rival to all of this, and kind of how has it been treated in East Lansing?
I'm sure it's exactly, pretty much exactly like it has been in the Ohio State circles. I mean, people are quick to, of course they're quick to point and, cast blame on people and, make, fantasy predictions of what's going to happen punishment-wise and everything. Yeah, I mean, Michigan State has a long history of feeling slighted by the Big Ten, and I think some of it's justified, some of it's probably a little, paranoia-driven and everything. But they want adequate punishment, and they want something to happen. They don't just want to see Michigan. They don't want to feel like Michigan just gets off easy,
right?
Something like this. You had Connor Stallions on their sideline in Central Michigan gear, so they feel like directly sort of, victimized by that. Let alone obviously everything that happens on the field. And this is a university too that a year ago had the tunnel fight incident, and that night, their due process were 2 words you never heard. Yeah. It was Harbaugh and Ward Manuel pounding the table for immediate justice and accountability and whatnot. There was the due process never seemed to come up. So, ESPN reported that the AD, Alan Haller, made a big point about that on their call when they talked with the commissioner, I think. And so, yeah, there's definitely a strong sense of like they can't get left off the hook from this, because there's always around here, people always believe that there's an implicit bias at the top for Michigan and Ohio State, actually. But, the 2 golden gooses and geese. And so that's kind of how people feel. They just want to see something happen, on the end of it. They don't want to feel like Michigan got away with this. And I guess that's sort of the overriding sentiment. They still beat them in 21 when allegedly some of this stuff was going on. So they have that, I guess. But, yeah, it's they're taking their victory lap and their moral superiority and saying, "Ha, you're some dirty cheaters. Look at you. This is all going to be vacated or whatever." There's a lot of that. But I think more than anything, they just don't want to feel like Michigan gets a free pass out of something like this.
Yeah, sounds very similar to what's gone on around here. I'm frankly, as I've said a few times the last couple weeks, I'm kind of sick of talking about it. But people want to talk about it, and it's a big story. So we continue.
For the first couple weeks, like the waves were pretty fun to ride because like every 8 to 12 hours, there was a major development. We were just like, oh my gosh. And then, oh my God. It was everywhere you looked, it was like something new was breaking. But now I'm starting to reach the fatigue point a little bit too, where I just kind of want something to happen to be done with it. Tip my cap to all the great reporting that's going on out there with it. But yeah, I'm kind of ready to reach the finish line on it all too, even though it's been a fairly fun ride at times.
Yeah, I had Alejandro Zuniga, one of our Michigan writers, on last week, and I said to him, like, this is supposed to be football time. Like, we're supposed to be talking football. Like, save this stuff for the off season. And, it would have been nice if this would have come out in, June when we don't have anything else to write about, right? That's when I would have been more all over it. All right, Steven. Well, thank you very much for jumping on. I know you're busy throughout every week, but look forward to seeing you in the press box on Saturday. And again, appreciate you working with us throughout this week.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me, and thanks for your help. And I'll see you Saturday.
All right, sounds good. That was Steven Brooks from Spartan Tailgate, our 24/7 Sports Michigan State site. Check out stuff over there if you are looking for any sort of Michigan State coverage. Obviously, they've kind of flown under the radar because of the season that the Spartans have had this year, but there's going to be some interesting decisions made up in East Lansing this offseason as they try and get back on track post Mel Tucker. And then obviously the game on Saturday here, Buckeyes big favorites. But you got to take care of business, right? So I want to now dive into, first of all, if you're watching this live, you have any questions you'd like answered about the Buckeyes, feel free to throw them in the comment section. I'll try and get to some at the end. We went long with Steven because I think he was doing a great job. But if you have any questions, throw them in there. We'll try and get to them. But I want to talk about this Buckeye offense because the perception, which I think is rooted in reality, is that this offense is kind of holding this team back, right? This is a national championship contender. They're the top-ranked team in the college football playoff rankings. Whether you believe they're the best team in the country or not doesn't really matter. They're one of the top four. If they win out, they're going to be in the playoff. If they lose a game to Michigan, I think you still have a pretty good case depending on what happens to other people. But the offense seems to be where everyone is concerned. And I want to start with Kyle McCord because I think that's where this all begins, right? The offensive line too, but I think they've gotten better week by week. And I think Kyle's gotten better. This was a stat that was thrown out earlier this week. Steve Hellwagon mentioned it on one of our podcasts earlier this week. If you compare Kyle McCord's numbers, and I'm going to do this in a second in case you can't look it up, to J.J. McCarthy of Michigan, who is getting Heisman Trophy buzz, they are eerily similar. And the conversation around Kyle is nowhere near the conversation around JJ. Let me read you Kyle's stats this year. He's completing 65% of his passes for 2,352 yards, 17 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Three of those 4 interceptions have come in the last 2 games. JJ McCarthy, to his credit, completing 75.7% of his passes. That's a decent jump. 2,134 yards, so about 200 fewer than Kyle, 18 touchdowns, 1 more than Kyle, 3 interceptions, 1 fewer than Kyle. Numbers pretty similar, right? What I've said about this throughout the season is that Kyle, fairly or not, is going to be held to a very high standard. And that standard is Heisman Trophy level quarterback. That is what Dwayne Haskins was. That is what Justin Fields and CJ Stroud were. Those guys in their first years as starters were remarkable for what a first-year starting quarterback generally is. If we're going to continue to use the J.J. McCarthy comparison, last year he threw for 2,000. He completed 64.6% of his passes, 2,719 yards, 22 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I have a few other guys here that I want to compare their first starting seasons for. Michael Penix Jr., maybe the favorite for the Heisman Trophy. Now, he is in his 6th year of college football and has put up berserk numbers, 3,201 yards, 26 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He's playing great. Washington is right on the edge of a playoff spot and will likely get in if they keep winning. But his first year starting at Indiana, we'll go to 2020. That was his third year in the program. It was his best season at Indiana. It was a year that he came into the Horseshoe. Now, a strange year, keep this in mind, because you didn't play as many games because of the COVID stuff. But still, you could extrapolate this out. 1,645 yards, 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. You play that out on a 12-game schedule. Kyle's looking to pass that. Some of those numbers he probably already has. Let's go to Bo Nix, who, again, another guy in the Heisman Trophy conversation now that he's transferred from Auburn to Oregon. He started as a true freshman, but we'll even go to his sophomore year, which actually his true freshman year was his best year of the first two. His best year at Auburn, 2,542 passing yards, completing 57.6% of his passes, 16 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. One more for you. Joe Burrow. Buckeye fans know Joe Burrow, right? We remember what he did when in his time in Columbus, which wasn't as much as he did at LSU. His first season at LSU, the year before he had the record-setting Heisman Trophy winning campaign, completed 57.8% of his passes for 2,894 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. I say all this because I'm not trying to defend Kyle McCord or say that he shouldn't be held to the same standard as Haskins, Fields, CJ Stroud. What I'm saying is that most first-year starting quarterbacks don't play as well as those three guys did. They are an anomaly, and Ohio State has benefited from that in a huge way. Kyle McCord has a chance to continue to get better, which he's done every week, despite what some people will tell you, and really have a great season next season. Now, we're focused on this year, and we're talking about this year's offense, and is it holding this team back? Is it good enough to help this Buckeye team, which has one of the best defenses in the country, win a national championship? Can Kyle McCord go into Ann Arbor and beat Michigan? Can Kyle McCord go into the college football playoff if the Buckeyes handle their business at the Big House and win a college football playoff game? It's not all on him, but he will be judged on that, correct? So you look at what Kyle's done, and he's continued to learn, continued to get better. Even in his worst statistical game last week in terms of yardage, throwing for only 189 yards, I thought that was one of the better performances he'd had because he took what the defense was giving him. Mostly, he did throw not a bad interception, but not a good interception. Just didn't put enough on it. I think he made the right read, and then he makes three great touchdown passes in that game. But the big thing for me was coming off of at Wisconsin and throwing that touchdown or that interception in the end zone, trying to make a play. Kyle really took what the defense gave him. 73.1% completions. That's his highest of the season. Now, granted, a lot of that was short stuff, but it certainly was not because – it was because of what Rutgers was doing. They were putting a shell on the defense, playing 2 high safeties. They weren't going to let Ohio State get anything over the top. So what did Kyle do? No, I'll dump it off to G. Scott. I'll throw it over the middle, let TreVeyon Henderson run for 65 yards, I think Ohio State could have helped him with some slant routes and things like that, get Marvin Harrison and Mekhi Buka more involved. But will this offense ever look like last year with CJ Stroud against Georgia and throwing it all over the place? No, but it doesn't need to. The defense is so good that they will keep this offense in games like they've done all season. Now, they will play better offenses, and they will get tested more than they have, but they've continued to show up and make plays. And then you've got TreVeyon Henderson, who was out for 3 weeks and has come back and has looked these last 2 weeks fresh and as good as he has since his freshman season. And I think that could be a big difference. And then you just have these receivers, right? Look, it's not that hard. Marvin Harrison's game last week, he caught 4 passes? Let me pull the numbers up here just to make sure I'm saying this correctly. He caught 4 passes for 25 yards. Still 2 touchdowns. Name of the game, scoring touchdowns, right? You want to score touchdowns? Kyle got him in the end zone twice. Emeka Egbuka just back from an injury that kept him out 3 weeks. We talked with him this week. He talked about just kind of feeling rusty. 4 catches, 29 yards. Those 2 guys alone are good enough that I think Kyle can make enough plays to win at a high level. He is already proven that he can win these big games, right? That's something that a lot of people have criticized CJ Stroud for. He didn't win the big games. He didn't beat Michigan. Kyle still hasn't done that. He'll have to go do that, but he has gone to Notre Dame. He has beaten Penn State at home. He went to Wisconsin. He played a good Rutgers team. And if you don't believe that's a good Rutgers team, College Football Playoff Committee this week used Rutgers as an example of why Ohio State stayed number 1. So look, I'm not saying Kyle doesn't need to get better. He certainly does. There are things that are still frustrating. The consistency is crazy weird in terms of you start 11 for 11 last week, then you go 1 of 5, including that interception, and then finish 7 of 10. Where's the consistency? He's got to find that. There's no doubt about that, because you can't have these lulls probably in a college football playoff semifinal. And I asked Ryan Day about that this week. He talked about getting his feet underneath him, and that's when Kyle plays his best. That needs to happen all the time, and they need to figure that out. Kyle needs to figure that out. But I think this is what you should expect from first-year starting quarterbacks. This is how they normally play out. It's slow progression throughout that first season. And I know you don't have time to wait because you've got a great defense that could win you a national championship, but I don't think you'll need to. At least I don't think that will be the reason that Ohio State loses. Maybe Kyle throws a really bad interception in one of these big games, but he's got the weapons around him that he can make these easier plays. It's not like some of those guys I mentioned. We'll exclude Joe Burrow because we know what he was throwing to with the receivers that they had at LSU. But some of those other guys I mentioned, including J.J. McCarthy, they didn't have those weapons to help them in that first year. So Kyle does, and I think that will ultimately be the difference, and he has to continue to improve. And I do think there is I would say a pretty good chance, assuming Kyle continues to put in the work and do the things that he's supposed to do, that he comes back next season, and there's a pretty big leap, year 1 to year 2. We can discuss that all later, but I do think it's important to remember this is a first-year starter, and these first-year starters these last few years have not been what is normal for a first-year guy at quarterback. I also think when we talk about this offense, it's important to remember that those guys have been out. They missed TreVeyon Henderson, I think, more than they probably realized in those 3 games. Now, it's worked out really well because he's come back and he's fresh, as I mentioned, and I think he's going to be huge down the stretch, assuming he stays healthy. But they missed those guys. Now you get TreVeyon Henderson back. All of a sudden, oh, wow, you have a running game, a really good running game, a diverse attack with your running back. Okay, you've got Emeka Egbuka that misses 3 games. Well, yeah, you can throw in some other guys, Xavier Johnson, who's played well. Carnell Tate has played well. Carnell Tate's just not ready yet to be Emeka Egbuka. Xavier Johnson, he can take those end arounds, those jet sweeps, but they're going for 4 or 5 yards. And Emeka Egbuka has the ability, they haven't always hit, but has the ability to make that 15, 20 yards when he's fully healthy. This could be a game Saturday where I think the pieces really start to come together. Now, it's against a bad Michigan State defense. Steven was just talking about, he thinks the secondary will make some plays, but they shouldn't be able to stop Ohio State's passing attack, Ohio State's offense. I think this is a game where Emeka Egbuka could get back into a groove. Cade Stover is expected to be back. Now, all of a sudden, this offense, it's coming back together, right? As Kyle McCord has now been into start 9-10. And I think this is where it has to start clicking, and it has to be consistent. And I think it will be. You've got these next 2 weeks, Michigan State, Minnesota at home. Get things flowing. As long as these guys are healthy, you shouldn't have much of a problem. And that's the way I kind of see it. Now, they need to go out and do it against Michigan. It needs to be better than it was against Notre Dame. It needs to be better than it was against Penn State when you didn't have Emeka Egbuka and you had a banged up Cade Stover from early on in that game. So, it has to continue to take steps, but I get the sense that people are really worried about this offense because of Kyle McCord or because of this offensive line, which has gotten better. Still some mistakes, but I think you're seeing the pieces start to finally, kind of congeal together as everyone's getting back healthy. And I think the Buckeyes have done a good job of managing those injuries, not getting guys back quicker just because they felt like they needed them on the field. It could start to take off. I don't think it's going to look like last year with CJ Stroud or 2 years ago with CJ Stroud or 3 years ago with Justin Fields. Kyle McCord just isn't there at this point in his career. Maybe he gets there at some point. But is it good enough to beat Michigan and Ann Arbor with the way this defense is playing? Yes. Is it good enough to go on, win the Big Ten, and make a run in the college football playoff? Yes, it's good enough. As long as this defense keeps playing the way that it is, these guys stay healthy. You need to get some guys back on the defensive side too. Lathan Ransom, specifically, a guy that they desperately missed last week just because of his veteran ability. But offensively, look, I believe in those big games, those college football playoff level games, you have to score points. But the Buckeyes have shown how good this defense is this year, that in some of those games, those matchup games, as Ryan Day calls it, they've been able to score enough points. You'll need to score more in the playoff. I don't think you can get away with scoring 17-ish points to 17, 18 points roughly in there, which is what they did against those top two teams that they played so far. You have to score more than that. But I think there's the potential of this offense to really start to click. We'll find out over these next couple weeks, won't we? The offense should look good with that. And I think Ohio State coaching staff, I meant to bring this up earlier, I think the coaching staff can help Kyle a bit more. I think there are things that he has done well, like play action. They've used that, especially now that you have a running game where he can start hitting on some things. I think some easy routes over the middle to get these guys going, get him going early in games and trying to get him into that rhythm earlier so that you're not trying to turn it on in the second half. And the Buckeyes have been good at that. But, play action especially, I think that's where he may be at his best right now. I think they could use that more to kind of, get things going. I also think he can use his legs a little bit more. I know he's not known for that, but when he's taken off and run, and maybe taking a hit or two and not a big hit, you don't want to get your quarterback hurt, but, whatever you got to do to wake him up and get him going. So we shall see, but I do think these next 2 weeks, things should start looking more like Ohio State fans expect. And I do think that that will start to maybe change the opinion a little bit. We'll see. All right. I want to get to our final segment. I'm looking here to see if there were any questions. I'm not sure I saw any. If you did post a question in the chat here, feel free to post it again just so I can try and answer that. But the final segment that we like to do here on the Bucknuts Happy Hour, what you'll be reading. Look, this game should be pretty straightforward. Sunday morning, when you get up, you're going to check on your Buckeye headlines on Bucknuts. Buckeyes handle business, hammer Spartans. If it's anything other than that, I'm going to have some serious questions. This is a Michigan State team. Yeah, they got a win last week against Nebraska. They're feeling better. They'd lost 6 straight games. They've really struggled in the Big Ten, 1-5. Don't give this team any hope. Go out there, put your foot on their throat early. Get this. This should be Purdue plus some. This game should be nearly over at halftime. Now, I will say, because I've watched this team play all season, they like to mess around in the first half and whatnot. So, look, I won't be surprised if this game's probably closer than it should be at halftime. And by that, I mean 24-7, or I don't know, something along those lines. But by the end of this game, the starters should not have played a ton. There should be pretty easy time to take these guys out, and it should be over by the fourth quarter at the latest. So I think coming up with the headline there should be pretty easy. Buckeyes roll Spartans, 1 week closer to Michigan should be the headline. There shouldn't be anything else to worry about. Did see a question here. Goj Do you think Carnell Tate is ready to be the full-time third wide receiver? So Marvin Harrison Jr. 1, Emeka Egbuka 2. If you're taking someone off the field at 3, it's Julian Fleming. And I know Fleming's numbers aren't good. I think he has 19 catches this season. But there's a reason Julian Fleming's on the field, and it is because of all the other things that he does. If you go back, there's a number of plays I could point to, but this is just the most recent. If you go back and watch, and I highlighted this in a piece I did earlier this week, if you go back and watch what Julian Fleming did on the Travion Henderson catch and run, a number of guys were key in that in terms of blocking. Xavier Johnson downfield, but Julian Fleming, the willingness to just fight and block, and a lot of receivers do this, but Carnell Tate has not shown he's ready for that side of the game yet. And that is something that, again, won't show up on the stat sheet, but pretty important for the Buckeyes. And look, that play from Travion Henderson still probably gets, 30, 40 yards, but the block by Fleming allowed him to cut back inside and take it another 15, 20 yards for that 65-yard gain, almost a touchdown if he doesn't get shoestring tackled at the end. So, look, I think if you're just talking purely catching the ball, I think Carnell Tate could go out there and do that. He has these last few weeks with Emeka Egbuka out, right? But I think there's still those other things that are pretty important that you have to have in this offense, and just maybe doesn't get talked about enough. All right, I don't see any other questions in there. If you have one, throw it in real quick before we wrap up. But I do want to thank Stephen Brooks from Spartan Tailgate for jumping on with us. I thought he gave a lot of good information about the Spartans. If you tuned in live late, go back and listen to Stephen. There was plenty of good information about what's going on at Michigan State, what's happened on the field, coaching search. He talked about the Michigan stuff from their perspective as well. So thank you to him for joining us. I look forward to seeing him on Saturday. Thank you for everyone who tuned in live, who listened to this as a podcast after the fact. This is another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I'm Patrick Murphy of 24/7 Sports and Bucknuts. Thanks again, guys. We will talk to you after the game on Saturday night. Going to be a late one, but should be pretty straightforward, I think. Right, guys?